This is part 11 of the series, ETL, Data Warehousing and Star Schemas in SQL Server, where part 10 normalization rules get deliberately, knowingly bent, for genuinely good reasons we're about to walk through in real depth. Part 10 was about eliminating redundancy, so your live transactional system never contradicts itself. This video is about a second, completely separate system, one built deliberately for reporting, where some of those exact same rules get relaxed on purpose, and where a handful of very real, very well-known problems show up the moment a team tries to report directly off their normalized production database instead. If you've ever wondered why a company seems to have two completely different copies of what looks like the same data, one for the application, one for the analytics team, this video is exactly the explanation for why that's usually the right call, not wasted duplication. Quick recap. Part 9 was procedures, views, and functions. Part 10 was normalization. Part 11, ETL, data warehousing, and star schemas. Everything in Part 10 was about making sure a live transactional system stays correct under constant inserts, updates, and deletes. This video picks up exactly where that left off, and asks a different question entirely: what happens when the business needs to ask big, historical questions across years of data, questions that normalized design was never actually built to answer quickly. As with every part of this series, none of this replaces what came before it, it sits alongside it, as a second, purpose-built system solving a genuinely different problem. Let's start with a genuinely common architecture mistake. An executive asks for a, quote, simple, year-over-year revenue report. Someone writes it as a 10-table join, and runs it straight against the exact same live database that's processing right now's checkout traffic. The report takes locks. Real customers checking out at that exact moment feel it as slowness, or outright timeouts on their own transactions. And the report itself is slow too, because a properly normalized OLTP schema, exactly what Part 10 recommended, is genuinely the wrong shape for scanning millions of historical rows all at once. Neither side is actually wrong here, they're just optimized for two completely different jobs, and trying to make one system do both jobs well is where this entire problem comes from. This is exactly the situation that pushes most growing companies toward building a second system, not because anyone particularly enjoys maintaining two databases, but because the alternative is a live application that gets measurably slower every single time someone in finance wants a historical chart. So, what is ETL? Extract, transform, load, the pipeline that moves data out of OLTP and into a warehouse. Extract pulls raw data out of a live OLTP system, ideally without disrupting it at all. Transform cleans, conforms, and reshapes the data, fixing inconsistent types, standardizing names across different source systems, calculating the actual measures reports will need. And load writes that reshaped result into the warehouse, sitting there ready for fast reporting, completely separate from the live transactional traffic. These three steps run on a schedule, often nightly, sometimes much more frequently, depending on how current the reporting actually needs to be. There's also a closely related pattern worth knowing about by name, ELT, where the raw extract gets loaded first and the transformation happens afterward, inside the warehouse itself, using the warehouse's own processing power rather than a separate transformation server, which has become increasingly common as cloud warehouses have gotten genuinely fast at large-scale transformations. So what is a data warehouse, exactly? A separate database, deliberately built for reading, not writing. It holds years of historical data that the live OLTP system may have already archived or even deleted outright. Nobody runs a checkout against it, so it never needs to worry about the kind of locking and concurrency we covered back in Part 8 at all, and it never needs to enforce every single anomaly-preventing rule from Part 10 either, because it isn't the system of record, it's a deliberately reshaped copy of the data, built specifically to answer big, historical questions fast, at the cost of not being the place anyone actually places an order. This separation also gives a business something genuinely valuable beyond speed. The warehouse becomes the one place where finance, marketing, and operations can all agree on a single, consistent definition of a metric like revenue, instead of each team calculating it slightly differently against the live system in their own separate spreadsheets. Let's put OLTP and OLAP side by side directly, because the contrast is really the whole point of this video. Purpose: OLTP runs the business right now. OLAP, the warehouse, helps you understand the business over time. Shape: OLTP is normalized, following Part 10 rules. OLAP uses a denormalized star schema, which is exactly what the rest of this video is about. Workload, OLTP handles many small reads and writes happening constantly. OLAP handles a few, genuinely huge reads scanning across millions of rows at once. And data. OLTP holds only the current state of the world. OLAP holds full history, including records that have since been changed or deleted entirely from the live system. It's worth remembering that these 4 rows weren't really independent facts. They all flow from the same underlying difference in purpose. Once you know a system exists to run the business moment to moment versus explain it over years, every one of these design choices follows almost automatically from that single distinction. Now, the star schema itself, the actual shape a data warehouse is built around. One fact table sits in the middle, and dimension tables radiate out around it, literally arranged like a star if you sketch it on a whiteboard. Here we've got fact sales in the center, surrounded by dim customer, dim product, dim date, and dim store. Every one of those dimension tables describes some aspect of a sale: who bought it, what they bought, when and where, while the fact table in the middle just records that the sale itself actually happened, along with its measurable numbers. Here's a fact table in actual code. Create table fact sales, with a sale ID as its primary key, then foreign keys out to every single dimension: date key referencing dim date, customer key referencing dim customer, product key referencing dim product, and finally, the actual numbers, quantity and revenue. Every single row represents one measurable event, one sale. Quantity and revenue are what get called the, quote, facts. They're the actual numbers report sum, average, and compare, while everything else in that row is just there to connect back to its descriptive context. Here's a dimension table in code, and this is exactly where Part 10 rules start bending on purpose. Create table dim product, with product name, category, subcategory, and brand, all flattened directly onto the same row. In Part 10 OLTP, world, category, and brand would almost certainly live in their own separate, normalized tables, to avoid exactly the kind of redundancy we spent that whole video discussing. Here, in a dimension table, they're deliberately flattened in on purpose. One single join reaches every attribute a report could possibly need, instead of 4 or 5 separate joins just to display one row on a dashboard. This is really the central idea of the entire star schema approach. Pay a small, deliberate storage cost, a little repeated text across dimension rows, in exchange for a query shape that's dramatically simpler and faster for the kind of large-scale aggregation reporting genuinely needs. Now, a genuinely famous problem in data warehousing, and the actual bug this video is built around: the slowly changing dimension. Alice bought a sofa in Texas, back in March. In June, she moves to Colorado, and her customer record gets updated in place. State equals Colorado, exactly the way you'd normally update a row in an OLTP system. Now run, quote, revenue by state, for March, against the warehouse. Alice's March sofa sale gets counted under Colorado, a state she genuinely hadn't even moved to yet at the time she actually bought it. The historical report is now factually, provably wrong, and it will stay wrong for every single report ever run again in the future, because that old Texas address was never preserved anywhere at all once the update happened. What makes this particularly dangerous is that nothing in the system throws an error. The update statement succeeds perfectly normally, the report runs successfully and produces a clean-looking number, and the only way anyone would ever notice the mistake is by manually cross-checking against records that may not even exist anymore by the time someone thinks to look. Here's the fix, and it has an actual formal name: slowly changing dimension, type 2. Create table dim customer, but with a surrogate key, customer key, that is deliberately not the same as the real, natural customer ID. Alongside state, we add an effective date, an expiration date that's null when the row is currently active, and in its current flag. Instead of updating Alice's row in place, you insert a brand new row, Texas, effective March, expired June. Then a second row, Colorado, effective June, still current today. Every single fact table row points to whichever customer key was actually, historically true on that specific date, so history gets preserved permanently, instead of being silently overwritten the moment something as ordinary as a customer's address changes. It's worth naming the alternative to type 1, which simply overwrites the old value with no history kept at all. That's genuinely fine for correcting a typo in someone's name, but it's exactly the wrong choice for any attribute a historical report might ever need to reference honestly. There's a related design choice worth knowing: star schema versus Snowflake schema. In a star schema, dimensions are flattened and denormalized, exactly like dim product a few minutes ago. One join reaches every single attribute, which tends to be simpler and usually faster for reporting workloads. In a Snowflake schema, dimensions get normalized further still. Category might get split out into its own separate table, referenced by dim product through a foreign key. That saves some storage, but it costs extra join on literally every single query touching that dimension. The practical rule: Snowflake only the dimensions genuinely large enough or repetitive enough to be worth the extra join and leave everything else flattened. Let's talk about how data actually gets loaded on an ongoing basis. Incremental loads versus full reloads. A full reload re-extracts every single row from the source, every single time it runs. Genuinely simple to write, but completely unworkable once a source table grows into the billions of rows. An incremental load tracks what's called a watermark, a timestamp or an ever-increasing ID, and only extracts rows that are new or changed since the previous run completed. Far more efficient at real scale, but it requires the source table to actually have a reliable last modified column to filter on in the first place, which is exactly the kind of thing worth designing in from day one, all the way back in part 10, specifically because of videos like this one down the road. There's a subtlety worth knowing too. Incremental loads have to handle deletions carefully, since a row that simply disappears from the source leaves no last modified timestamp behind at all, which is why many real warehouse designs use a soft delete flag in the source system instead of ever physically removing a row. Let's cover the mistakes worth watching for. First, loading fact rows before their dimensions actually exist. A fact row referencing a customer key that hasn't loaded yet becomes an orphan, or gets rejected outright by the foreign key constraint. Exactly like the missing foreign key problem from part 10, just showing up in a completely different context here. Second, ignoring slowly changing dimensions entirely, the bug from earlier in this video, which silently rewrites history every single time a dimension attribute happens to change. And third, snowflaking dimensions that literally nobody ever queries separately, extra join added purely for a kind of normalization purity that reporting users never actually asked for, and genuinely never benefit from in practice. A fourth, quieter mistake worth naming too, forgetting to handle late writing facts, a sale that gets recorded in the source system a few days after it actually happened, which can silently land in the wrong reporting period if the ETL process isn't specifically designed to catch it. Let's walk through building the actual star schema for the exact business we've used throughout this whole series. Source: the normalized customers, ORs, order items and products tables from part 10. Extract: pull new and changed rows since the last run, using a last modified watermark column. Transform: flatten product category and brand directly into dim product. Transform again: detect customer attribute changes, and insert new slowly changing dimension rows instead of updating existing ones in place. Load: insert new rows into fact sales, each one referencing the correct, historically accurate customer key for that point in time. The result, quote, revenue by state, by quarter, becomes one single, clean query away, and it stays historically accurate forever, no matter how many customers move, change their name, or update their information after the fact. Compare that to running the equivalent query against the original normalized schema from part 10, joining 5 tables and somehow trying to reconstruct what each customer's address actually was on each historical sale date, and the value of everything we've covered in this video becomes genuinely obvious. So here's the takeaway. 2 databases, 2 genuinely different jobs, and one honest, deliberate trade-off between them. OLTP runs the business right now in this exact moment. The warehouse explains the business over time, across years of history. Facts hold the actual numbers. Dimensions hold the surrounding context. And slowly changing dimensions are specifically what keep that history honest. The moment context inevitably changes, the way it always eventually does for every single customer, product, and store in a real, living business. This whole video really comes down to one idea worth carrying forward. A warehouse isn't a lazier, worse designed copy of your old database. It's a deliberately, carefully designed system built for an entirely different job. And once you see it that way, denormalization stops looking like a mistake and starts looking like exactly the right tool, used precisely where it belongs. If there's one habit to take from this entire video into your own work, it's this. Whenever you catch yourself about to run a large, historical, aggregate-heavy report directly against a live transactional table, Stop and ask whether that query genuinely belongs in a warehouse instead, because more often than not, it does. Next up in this series, backup, recovery, and disaster recovery, protecting absolutely everything. This entire series has spent 11 videos building. Thanks so much for watching.